Welcome to her journey, a place where every woman's tale is a tool for empowerment and women are transformed into winners. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. My name is Marian Cole, and at 55, I've learned that family can be the most dangerous poison of all. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my sunroom, casting long shadows across the marble floor. I sat in my favorite chair, Italian leather, the color of dark chocolate, sipping Earl Grey from bone china that had belonged to my grandmother. The newspaper lay folded beside me, but I wasn't reading. I was waiting. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard the familiar sound of Eva's heels clicking against the hardwood floors of my foyer. She'd always walked like she was on a runway, even as a child. Behind her, softer footsteps, Derek's expensive loafers whispering across my floors like a snake through grass. "Good morning, Mother," Eva said, sweeping into the room with that practiced smile she'd perfected in her 20s. She was beautiful, my daughter, all flowing blonde hair and sharp cheekbones that she'd inherited from me. But there was something brittle about her beauty now, like expensive glass that had been cracked and hastily glued back together. Derek followed behind her, and I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. Handsome didn't begin to describe him. He was the kind of man who made women forget their own names. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that always looked perfectly tousled and green eyes that seemed to see right through you. Those eyes had fooled my daughter completely. They hadn't fooled me. "Marian," Derek said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His cologne was expensive Tom Ford, if I had to guess, but underneath it I caught something else. Something that made my skin crawl. "You look stunning as always." I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. "Flattery this early in the morning, Derek? You must want something." Eva shot him a warning look before settling onto the love seat across from me. Derek remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back like a soldier at attention. Or a predator ready to strike. "We wanted to discuss an opportunity with you," Eva began, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone she used when she wanted something. "Derek and I have been working on this business plan." "The boutique," I interrupted, not bothering to hide my disdain. "Yes, I've heard about this venture of yours." Derek stepped forward, his smile widening. "It's not just any boutique, Marian. We're talking about a luxury fashion house. High-end clientele, exclusive pieces. The profit margins are incredible." I studied his face as he spoke, watching the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned money. He reminded me of a shark I'd once seen in an aquarium, all sleek beauty and hidden teeth. "The initial investment is substantial," Eva said, her fingers twisting the wedding ring Derek had given her. "But the returns will be astronomical. We just need $200,000, I finished for her. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear the gardener's lawnmower humming in the distance, and somewhere in the house, my housekeeper was preparing lunch. Normal sounds of a normal day, but nothing about this moment felt normal. Eva's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. "It's an investment, Mother. In our future. In your grandchildren's future." That last part stung, and she knew it. Eva and Derek had been married for 3 years, and she'd been dropping hints about grandchildren since their honeymoon. But no babies had come, and I suspected they never would. Not as long as Derek was more interested in my bank account than my daughter's happiness. "Grandchildren," I repeated, tasting the word like wine that had turned to vinegar. "And tell me, Eva, what makes you think this boutique won't end up like Derek's other business ventures?" Derek's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in that perfect facade. "Those were learning experiences," he said smoothly. "Every entrepreneur has setbacks." "Setbacks?" I mused. "Is that what we're calling bankruptcy now?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eva's face went pale, and Derek's hands clenched into fists behind his back. That's not fair, Eva whispered. Everyone deserves a second chance. I stood up slowly, my silk dress rustling like autumn leaves. At 55, I'd kept myself in excellent shape. Yoga, Pilates, and good genes had been kind to me. I was still beautiful, still commanding, and I used every inch of that power as I looked down at my daughter and her husband. Fair? I asked, my voice soft as velvet and twice as deadly. Was it fair when Derek convinced you to quit your job at the law firm? Was it fair when he moved you both into my house for 3 years while he found himself? Was it fair when he used your trust fund as collateral for that disastrous restaurant venture? Each word hit its target with surgical precision. Eva flinched as if I'd slapped her, and Derek's perfect composure finally cracked completely. We've paid you back for everything, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Have you? I walked to the window, gazing out at the perfectly manicured gardens that surrounded my estate. Because my accountant seems to think you still owe me quite a bit. But I'm not here to argue about money. I turned back to face them, and I saw something flicker in Derek's eyes, something dark and cold that made my blood run chill. The answer is no, I said simply. No to the boutique, no to the $200,000, and no to any future requests for funding your husband's schemes. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Eva's eyes filled with tears, but Derek just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something much more dangerous. Mom, please, Eva started, but I held up a hand to silence her. I've supported you both for years, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. I've opened my home, my wallet, and my heart. But I won't stand by and watch you destroy yourself for a man who sees you as nothing more than a meal ticket. Derek stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent ice through my veins. We understand, he said quietly. Don't we, Eva? My daughter nodded mutely, tears streaming down her cheeks. They turned to leave, but as they reached the doorway, Derek looked back at me over his shoulder. Thank you for your time, Marian, he said, his voice pleasant and conversational. But his eyes promised retribution. After they left, I returned to my chair and picked up my teacup with trembling hands. The Earl Grey had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, trying to wash away the taste of fear that had suddenly filled my mouth. Outside, Derek's BMW roared to life, and I watched through the window as they drove away. But even after the car disappeared around the bend, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days passed in blessed silence. 3 days of normal routines, morning yoga, afternoon tea, evening walks through my gardens. 3 days to convince myself that I'd been paranoid, that Derek's parting look had been nothing more than wounded pride. I should have known better. It was Thursday morning when he came back. I was in my study, reviewing some investment portfolios, when I heard the doorbell chime. My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, answered it, and I heard Derek's voice floating through the house like poison in the water supply. Is Mrs. Cole available? I'd like to speak with her, if possible. His tone was different, softer, more contrite. The voice of a man seeking forgiveness rather than demanding compliance. But I knew better than to trust the wolf just because he'd learned to bleat like a lamb. Mrs. Patterson appeared in my study doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. She'd worked for me for over a decade, and she'd never liked Derek. Smart woman. Mr. Hartwell is here to see you, ma'am, she said, emphasizing his last name with just enough disdain to make her feelings clear. Shall I tell him you're busy? I considered it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to have her send him away, to never let him darken my doorway again. But curiosity won out. What game was he playing now? Send him to the sunroom, I said finally. And Mrs. Patterson? Stay close. She nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Mrs. Patterson had raised 4 sons of her own, and she could spot a dangerous man from a mile away. I made my way to the sunroom, settling into the same chair I'd occupied 3 days earlier. The morning light was different today, harsher somehow, casting sharp shadows across the room like prison bars. Derek appeared in the doorway carrying a silver thermos, and my first thought was how different he looked. Gone was the predatory confidence, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. He was dressed more casually too, jeans and a soft gray sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds. "Marian," he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Derek?" He held up the thermos, offering what appeared to be a sheepish smile. "I wanted to apologize. For the other day, for everything, really. I brought a peace offering." He moved closer, and I caught the rich aroma of coffee, something expensive and exotic. Colombian, maybe, with hints of chocolate and caramel. Under normal circumstances, it would have been irresistible. These weren't normal circumstances. "I know how much you love good coffee," he continued, unscrewing the cap of the thermos. "This is a special blend I've been perfecting. Fair trade Colombian beans, roasted to perfection. I thought it might be a way to start over." He poured the coffee into one of my good cups, Wedgwood, white with delicate blue flowers. The liquid was dark as midnight, with a perfect crema on top that spoke of expert preparation. But as he handed it to me, I caught something else beneath the rich coffee aroma. Something metallic. Something that made my stomach clench with sudden fear. "Where's Eva?" I asked, not taking the cup yet. "Spa day with her girlfriends," Derek replied easily. "She deserves some pampering after the stress I've caused her. I insisted she go." How convenient, I thought. Eva safely out of the way, while Derek came to make his peace offering. My paranoia kicked into high gear, every nerve ending suddenly alive with danger signals. But I smiled and took the cup, letting my fingers brush against his as I did. His hands were steady, but I felt a fine tremor in his fingertips, the kind of shake that comes from adrenaline, not nerves. "Thank you," I said, raising the cup toward my lips. "It smells wonderful." Derek's eyes never left my face as I brought the cup closer. I saw something flicker in those green depths. Anticipation? Excitement? Whatever it was, it confirmed every suspicion I'd been harboring. "Let me get some cookies to go with this," I said, setting the cup down on the side table. "I think Mrs. Patterson made some of those shortbread ones you like." I stood up slowly, watching his face carefully. For just a moment, disappointment flashed across his features before he could hide it behind that practiced smile. "That sounds perfect," he said. "Take your time." I walked to the kitchen with measured steps, fighting every instinct that urged me to run. Mrs. Patterson was there, as I'd known she would be, arranging flowers in a vase by the window. "Mrs. Patterson," I said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. Call my lawyer and tell him to come over immediately. Tell him it's an emergency." Her eyes sharpened. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" "No," I said simply. "It's not." I opened the cabinet and retrieved my everyday coffee cups, heavy ceramic mugs that Mrs. Patterson used for the staff. Working quickly, I poured Derek's special blend into one of them, then filled my Wedgwood cup with plain black coffee from the pot Mrs. Patterson always kept fresh. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Staying alive," I replied. I arranged some shortbread cookies on a silver tray, my hands remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Then I picked up both cups and headed back to the sunroom. Derek was exactly where I'd left him, but I noticed he'd moved closer to my chair. He straightened as I approached, that false smile never wavering. "Here we are," I said cheerfully, setting the tray down on the coffee table. I placed the ceramic mug, the one filled with his poison coffee, next to my chair and kept the Wedgwood cup for myself. But as I sat down, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, unfamiliar steps that didn't belong to Mrs. Patterson. "Oh, that must be my guest," Derek said, glancing toward the doorway. "I hope you don't mind. I brought my mother along. She's been dying to see your beautiful home." My blood turned to ice. His mother, a witness to whatever he had planned. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway, and despite my fear, I had to admire Derek's cunning. Mrs. Green was the picture of grandmotherly respectability, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a navy cardigan and pearls. She looked like someone who baked cookies and volunteered at church, not someone who would be party to whatever this was. "Mrs. Cole," she exclaimed, bustling into the room with surprising energy for someone who had to be pushing 80. "What a lovely home you have. Derek has told me so much about you." I stood to greet her, my mind racing. This changed everything. If Derek had brought his mother as a witness, what exactly did he think was going to happen to me? "How wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Green," I said, extending my hand. "Please have a seat. We were just about to have coffee." She settled onto the love seat with a grateful sigh. "Oh, coffee sounds divine. I could use a pick-me-up after that long drive." Derek moved smoothly to the coffee service, and I watched in fascination as he poured coffee from his thermos into a third cup. His mother's cup. The same poison blend he'd intended for me. "Here you go, Mom," he said, handing her the cup with steady hands. "My special blend." But Mrs. Green was already reaching for the ceramic mug I'd placed by my chair, the one filled with Derek's original poison. "Oh, this looks perfect," she said, lifting it to her lips. "Nothing like a good cup of coffee, too." "Wait," Derek said sharply, but it was too late. Mrs. Green had already taken a large sip, and her face lit up with pleasure. "Oh my, this is delicious. Derek, you've outdone yourself." I watched Derek's face go through a series of expressions: shock, horror, and something that might have been grief. Whatever he'd put in that coffee, he'd just watched his own mother drink it. "How do you take your coffee, Mrs. Green?" I asked pleasantly, settling back in my chair with my safe cup, the one filled with plain black coffee. "Just like this," she replied, taking another generous sip. "Perfect as it is." Derek sank into the remaining chair, his face pale as parchment. The perfect, controlled mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the panic underneath. We sat in silence for a few minutes, making polite conversation about the weather, my gardens, Mrs. Green's arthritis. Normal things that people discussed over coffee on a Thursday morning. Normal things that felt absolutely surreal given the circumstances. I kept waiting for Derek to do something, snatch the cup away from his mother, fake an emergency to get her out of the house, something. But he just sat there, frozen, watching his mother drink poison meant for me. Poetic justice, I thought. Though I took no pleasure in what was about to happen to an innocent woman. 25 minutes later, Mrs. Green set down her empty cup and smiled at us both. "That was absolutely divine," she said. "I feel so much more." The words died in her throat. Her hand flew to her chest, and her face went gray. "Mom?" Derek was on his feet instantly, all pretense abandoned. "Mom, what's wrong?" Mrs. Green tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. Her eyes were wide with terror and confusion, and she clutched at her chest as if trying to claw out whatever was happening inside. I reached for my phone, dialing 911 with steady fingers while Derek knelt beside his mother's chair, calling her name over and again. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Marian Cole at 1247, Rosewood Drive," I said calmly. "I need an ambulance immediately. We have an elderly woman experiencing what appears to be cardiac distress." Mrs. Green slumped forward, and Derek caught her, cradling her against his chest. For a moment, looking at them, I almost felt sorry for him. Whatever else he was, he seemed to genuinely love his mother. But then I remembered the look in his eyes 3 days ago, and my sympathy evaporated. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and I watched from my front steps as they loaded Mrs. Green onto a stretcher. She was unconscious by then, her face waxy and still. Derek climbed into the ambulance with her, but not before shooting me one last look. This time, there was no mistaking the expression in his eyes. It was pure, undiluted hatred. The house felt unnaturally quiet after the ambulance pulled away. Mrs. Patterson stood beside me on the front steps, her weathered hands twisted in her apron. "That poor woman," she murmured. "Should I call Mrs. Eva?" "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." I walked back into the sunroom, where the evidence of Derek's failed attempt still sat on the coffee table. The silver thermos gleamed in the afternoon light, innocent-looking and deadly. I picked up the ceramic mug Mrs. Green had drunk from, holding it carefully by the handle. Even empty, it seemed to radiate malevolence. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, her face creased with worry. "Ma'am, what really happened here?" I turned to face her. This woman who had been more than an employee. She'd been a friend, a confidant, sometimes the only person who told me the truth when I didn't want to hear it. "Derek tried to poison me," I said simply. She didn't look surprised. Worried, yes. Frightened, certainly, but not surprised. "I knew that boy was trouble the first time I laid eyes on him," she said, settling heavily into the chair Derek had vacated. "But poisoning, that's different from being a fortune hunter." I carried the mug to the kitchen, sealing it in a plastic bag with shaking hands. Evidence. I would need evidence. "What are you going to do?" Mrs. Patterson asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? Derek had just attempted murder, but his intended victim was alive and well, sipping tea in her sunroom. His accomplice, if Mrs. Green had been an accomplice, was fighting for her life in a hospital bed after drinking poison meant for me. The irony was almost too perfect to be accidental. "I'm going to destroy him," I said, and I meant every word. My phone rang then, Eva's ringtone, a cheerful melody that seemed obscene given the circumstances. I considered not answering, but decided I needed to hear her voice, needed to gauge whether she knew what her husband had planned. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, injecting false cheer into my voice. "Mom." Eva's voice was bright with spa-day relaxation.
"How are you?"
Derek said he was going to stop by and apologize. So she knew he'd come over. But did she know why? Really know why? "He did," I said carefully. "He brought his mother with him." "Oh, Mrs. Green is so sweet. I hope you liked her." The past tense wasn't lost on me. Whatever happened at the hospital, Eva would soon be planning a funeral instead of a business venture. "She was lovely," I lied. "Eva, there's been an accident. Mrs. Green had some kind of cardiac episode while she was here. She's been taken to the hospital." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "What?" Eva's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What happened?" "I don't know exactly. We were having coffee and she just collapsed. Derek went with her in the ambulance." "Oh my God." I could hear Eva moving around, probably gathering her things to leave the spa. "Which hospital?" "I need to get there." "St. Mary's, I think." "Eva." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You should prepare yourself." She looked very ill. After Eva hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the bagged coffee mug on the counter. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that should have been beautiful, but just looked ominous. I thought about Derek, sitting in a hospital waiting room, watching his mother die from poison he'd prepared for me. I thought about Eva, racing through traffic to be with her husband during his time of grief, never suspecting that her mother was the real target of his rage. And I thought about my next move. Derek had made a fatal error. He'd underestimated me. He'd seen a wealthy widow, soft from years of comfortable living, and assumed I'd be an easy mark. He'd looked at my designer clothes and perfectly appointed home and decided I was nothing more than a pampered ornament. He was wrong. I'd built my fortune from nothing, starting with a small inheritance from my grandmother and turning it into millions through careful investments and shrewd business decisions. I'd survived my husband's death, raised a daughter as a single mother, and navigated the shark-infested waters of high society without losing my soul or my sanity. Derek Hartwell had no idea who he was dealing with. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "She's gone. This isn't over." I smiled, a cold expression that would have chilled anyone who saw it. I typed back, "I'm counting on it." Then I deleted the exchange and went upstairs to my bedroom. In the bottom drawer of my antique dresser, beneath layers of silk scarves and jewelry boxes, I found what I was looking for: a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. The tab read, Derek Hartwell. Background investigation. I'd hired the private investigator 2 weeks after Eva announced her engagement. Call it mother's intuition, call it paranoia. I needed to know who my daughter was planning to marry. What I'd found had kept me awake for weeks. Derek Hartwell wasn't just a failed entrepreneur. He was a con man, a predator who'd left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across 3 states. His mother, Mrs. Green, wasn't his mother at all. She was his partner, a woman named Martha Crenshaw who'd been running grifts since the 1970s. They'd targeted wealthy widows, young heiresses, anyone with money and a trusting nature. The pattern was always the same. Derek would seduce the mark, gain their trust, then slowly drain their resources before disappearing. Martha would play whatever role the con required: concerned mother, distant aunt, family friend. They were professionals. But this time was different. This time, Derek had fallen for his own Mark's daughter, and that had complicated everything. Eva wasn't just another victim. She was his wife, his legitimacy, his cover story. And I wasn't just another wealthy widow. I was the woman standing between him and Eva's inheritance. I spread the contents of the folder across my bed: bank records, police reports, testimonies from previous victims. Martha Crenshaw had been arrested twice, but never convicted. Derek had been questioned in connection with several suspicious deaths, but never charged. They were good at what they did. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd tried to kill me in my own home. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Stephanie Chun, Private Investigations. Stephanie, it's Marian Cole. I need to see you tonight. It's urgent. Marian? Stephanie's voice sharpened with interest. What's going on? Derek Hartwell just tried to poison me. His partner, the woman he claimed was his mother, drank it instead and died. I need you to help me destroy him. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for exactly 3 seconds. I'll be there in an hour. Stephanie Chin arrived at my house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that seemed appropriate for what we were planning. I'd known Stephanie for nearly a decade. She'd been a detective with the city police before going private, and she was the best investigator I'd ever met. She was also one of the few people who knew the whole truth about Derek. "Show me everything," she said without preamble, settling into my study with the focused intensity of a predator on the hunt. I handed her the bagged coffee mug first, watching as she examined it with professional detachment. "We'll need this tested," she said. "But carefully. If this goes to trial, chain of custody will be crucial." "Will it go to trial?" I asked. Stephanie's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, it's going to trial. Derek Hartwell's reign of terror ends tonight. We spend the next 2 hours going over everything: the original background investigation, Derek's failed attempt on my life, Martha Crenshaw's death. Stephanie took notes in her careful handwriting, occasionally asking questions that helped clarify details I might have missed. The beautiful thing, she said finally, leaning back in her chair, is that he's handed us everything we need to destroy him. Martha's death gives us probable cause to investigate him for attempted murder. Once we start digging into his background, all those other victims will come forward. And Eva? Stephanie's expression softened slightly. Eva's going to be devastated. But Marian, you have to understand, she was never safe with him. If he was willing to kill you for her inheritance, what do you think would have happened to her once he got what he wanted? I'd been trying not to think about that, but Stephanie was right. Derek had married Eva for her money, not for love. Once he'd secured her inheritance, she would have become a liability. What's our first move? I asked. We go to the police tomorrow morning. We present them with everything, the background investigation, the coffee mug, testimony about what happened today. We give them enough to get a warrant to search Derek's house. My phone rang then, Eva again. I glanced at Stephanie, who nodded. Put it on speaker, she whispered. Hi, sweetheart, I said, touching the speaker icon. How is everything? Eva's voice was thick with tears. She's gone, Mom. Mrs. Green is gone. The doctors said it was some kind of cardiac event, but they want to do an autopsy. He's completely broken. I bet he was. Watching your partner die from poison you'd prepared for someone else would be traumatic for anyone, even a sociopathic con artist. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Could you come to the hospital? Derek needs support right now, and I don't know what to do. I looked at Stephanie, who was shaking her head frantically. Of course, I said. I'll be right there. After I hung up, Stephanie grabbed my arm. Marian, you can't go there. It's too dangerous. He won't try anything at the hospital, I said. Too many witnesses. Besides, I need to see his face when he looks at me. I need to see what he's planning next. Stephanie sighed. Fine. But I'm coming with you. And we're wearing wires. St. Mary's Hospital at night was a maze of sterile corridors and flickering fluorescent lights. We found Eva and Derek in the family waiting area, a depressing space with uncomfortable chairs and magazines from 3 years ago. Eva looked like she'd been crying for hours. Her perfect makeup was ruined, and her designer dress was wrinkled from sitting in plastic hospital chairs. When she saw me, she jumped up and threw herself into my arms. Mom, thank God you're here, she sobbed against my shoulder. I don't know what to do. The doctors are asking all these questions, and Derek can barely speak. I looked over Eva's head at Derek, who was slumped in a corner chair, staring at nothing. He looked like a man in shock, but I knew better. Behind that blank expression, his mind was racing, trying to figure out how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. Derek, I said softly, I'm so sorry for your loss. He looked up at me then, and for a moment his mask slipped. In his eyes, I saw confusion, grief, and something else, a cold, calculating intelligence that was already working on his next move. Thank you, Marian, he said, his voice hoarse. I can't believe she's gone. What did the doctors say? Stephanie asked, introducing herself as my assistant. Derek's gaze sharpened as he looked at her, and I saw him mentally filing away details. Her professional demeanor, the way she carried herself, the questions she was asking. He knew a cop when he saw one, even an ex-cop. Heart attack, Eva answered when Derek didn't respond. Massive cardiac event, they said. But they want to do an autopsy to rule out other causes. Other causes. The words hung in the air like a threat. That's standard procedure, Stephanie assured them. Especially when someone dies suddenly without a history of heart problems. Derek flinched at that, and I filed the reaction away for later. Martha Crenshaw, Mrs. Green, apparently hadn't had heart problems, which meant the autopsy would reveal the poison, which would lead to questions about what she'd consumed before her death, which would lead them straight back to Derek's special blend coffee. We stayed at the hospital for another hour, long enough for me to see Derek slowly pulling himself together, rebuilding the mask he wore for the world. By the time we left, he was playing the grieving son again, accepting condolences and making arrangements for Martha's body. But I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the expression in his eyes made my blood run cold. He was already planning my death. The difference was, this time I'd be ready for him. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and careful choreography. Stephanie had connections throughout the department, and she'd called in every favor she was owed to fast-track the investigation. The autopsy results came back faster than anyone expected. Martha Crenshaw had died from digitalis poisoning, the same compound found in foxglove plants and, coincidentally, the same poison that had killed at least 3 other people connected to Derek Hartwell over the past 5 years. I was sitting in my study when Detective Ray Morrison came to interview me. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Stephanie had vouched for him, calling him one of the few completely honest cops she'd worked with. "Mrs. Cole," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened the day Mrs. Crenshaw died." I told him everything, from Derek's unexpected visit to his mother's sudden collapse. I described the coffee, the strange metallic smell, my decision to excuse myself to the kitchen. I didn't mention switching the cups. That would come later, when I was certain Derek would be charged. Detective Morrison took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Cole, I have to ask, do you believe Derek Hartwell intended to harm you?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I believe he intended to kill me." "And why would he want to do that?" I leaned back in my chair, considering how much to reveal. Because I refused to give him money. Because I stood between him and my daughter's inheritance. Because I knew who he really was. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You knew his background?" I handed him a copy of Stephanie's investigation file. "I hired a private investigator when my daughter announced her engagement." "What I found? Well, it's all in there." He flipped through the file, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me with something approaching admiration. "You've been sitting on this for 3 years?" I hoped I was wrong about him. I hoped love would change him, or at least that he'd be content with Eva's trust fund. I never imagined he'd resort to murder. But that wasn't entirely true. Deep down, I'd always known Derek was capable of violence. The file contained testimony from 2 of his previous victims, women who'd escaped his clutches before he could finish what he'd started. Both had reported feeling threatened. Both had received anonymous messages after they'd cut him off. One of them had found a dead cat on her doorstep. Detective Morrison closed the file and stood up. "We'll be bringing Mr. Hartwell in for questioning tomorrow. Given the evidence we have, the autopsy results, the background investigation, your testimony, I'm confident we can get a warrant to search his residence." "What about Eva?" I asked. "She doesn't know any of this yet." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "We'll need to interview her as well. But Mrs. Cole, your daughter is going to need your support. Learning that your husband is a killer, that's not something anyone recovers from easily." After he left, I sat alone in my study, staring out at the gardens where I'd once felt so safe. Everything was about to change. Within hours, Derek would be arrested, Eva's world would shatter, and our family would be thrust into the spotlight of a murder investigation. But it had to be done. Derek had made his choice when he'd brought that poison coffee into my home. My phone buzzed with a text from Eva. "Can you come over? Derek's been acting strange since the funeral arrangements started. I'm worried about him." I stared at the message for a long moment. Derek was probably suspicious, wondering why the police hadn't contacted him yet about Martha's autopsy results. He was smart enough to know that digitalis poisoning would raise red flags, smart enough to realize his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, which made him desperate. And desperate men were capable of anything. I called Stephanie instead of texting Eva back. "Don't go over there," she said immediately when I explained. "Morrison wants to arrest him tomorrow morning, but if Derek suspects something, he might run," I finished. "Or worse, he might decide to eliminate the only witness to what happened." "Eva?" "Eva," I confirmed. She was the only other person who knew he'd gone to see me that day. If he kills her and makes it look like suicide or an accident, he walks away clean, Stephanie said grimly. Grieving widower, too devastated by his wife's death to be suspected of anything. I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "I'm going over there," I said. "Marian." Not to confront him. To get Eva out of that house. Tonight. An hour later, I was standing on Derek and Eva's front porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house was dark except for a single light in the upstairs bedroom, their bedroom, where Eva was probably getting ready for bed, completely unaware that she was sleeping next to a killer. Derek answered the door himself, and the transformation in his appearance was startling. Gone was the polished, handsome man who'd charmed my daughter. In his place stood someone hollow-eyed and gaunt, with the desperate look of a cornered animal. "Marian," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected. I was worried about Eva," I said, stepping past him into the foyer. She sounded upset when she texted. Derek closed the door behind me, and I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. Locked in, I thought. But I'd expected that. "She's upstairs," Derek said. "But she's finally sleeping. The stress of Mom's death has been difficult." I nodded sympathetically, all the while cataloging details. Derek's hands were trembling slightly, and there was a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. On the hall table, I spotted his car keys and wallet, positioned as if he'd been preparing to leave in a hurry. "I won't wake her then," I said. "But Derek, I wanted to talk to you about something." His eyes sharpened. "Oh, I've been thinking about your business proposal. The boutique." Maybe I was too hasty in saying no. For a moment, hope flared in his eyes, followed quickly by suspicion. He studied my face, looking for signs of deception. "What changed your mind?" he asked carefully. "Martha's death," I said simply. "It reminded me how short life is, how important family is. If this business venture will make Eva happy." Derek's smile was like a razor blade, all sharp edges and barely concealed violence. "That's very generous of you, Marian. Very unexpected." "Well, you've certainly made an impression on me," I said, letting a double meaning color my words. We stared at each other in the dimly lit foyer, two predators sizing each other up. Derek thought he was looking at a wealthy widow who'd finally been intimidated into compliance. I was looking at a killer who had no idea the net was already closing around him. "Mom?" Eva's voice drifted down from upstairs, sleepy and confused. "Is that you?" "Just checking on you, sweetheart," I called back. "Go back to sleep." But Eva appeared at the top of the stairs anyway, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair mussed from sleep. She looked so young, so vulnerable, and I felt a fierce surge of protective anger. "What are you doing here so late?" she asked, patting down the stairs in bare feet. "Your mother had a change of heart about our business venture," Derek said smoothly. "Isn't that wonderful?" Eva's face lit up with genuine joy, and I hated myself for the deception. But in a few hours, when Derek was in custody and the truth came out, she'd understand why I'd lied. "Really?" Eva threw her arms around me, and I smelled her perfume, the same fragrance she'd worn since college, light and floral, and innocent. "Oh, Mom, thank you. This means everything to us." Over her shoulder, I saw Derek watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was satisfaction there, but something else too. Something that looked almost like regret. For just a moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong about him. If maybe, beneath all the lies and manipulation, he really did love my daughter. Then Eva pulled away, and Derek's mask slipped back into place. "We should celebrate," he said. "I'll open a bottle of champagne." "Actually," I said quickly, "I can't stay long. I just wanted to let you know my decision. We can discuss the details tomorrow." Derek's smile faltered. "Tomorrow? But surely we could." "Tomorrow," I said firmly. "Good night, Eva." "Derek." I headed for the door, but Derek stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "I insist you stay for just one drink," he said, his voice taking on an edge that made Eva look up sharply. "To celebrate our new partnership." The air in the foyer suddenly felt thick and dangerous. Eva sensed it too. I saw her glance nervously between Derek and me, confusion clouding her features. "Derek," she said quietly, "if Mom needs to go." "She doesn't need to go anywhere," Derek replied, not taking his eyes off my face. "Do you, Marian?" It was a threat barely disguised. Stay and risk whatever he had planned. Leave and abandon Eva to face his wrath alone when the police came for him in the morning. I made the only choice I could. "One drink," I agreed. "But then I really must go." Derek's smile returned, cold and triumphant. "Excellent. I'll get that champagne." As he disappeared into the kitchen, Eva moved closer to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what's wrong? You're acting strange, and Derek's been different since his mother died." I took her hands in mine, squeezing gently. "Eva, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, I want you to come stay with me for a few days."
"Why?"
"What's?" "Promise me," I said urgently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, promise me you'll come home." Before Eva could respond, Derek returned with a bottle of Dom Perignon and 3 crystal flutes. His movements were controlled, deliberate, but I noticed his hands were still shaking slightly as he poured. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To family," I countered, watching his face carefully. "To love," Eva added softly, completely unaware of the deadly undercurrents swirling around her. We drank, and I tasted only champagne, crisp and expensive and perfectly normal. Whatever Derek was planning, it wasn't another poisoning. Not with Eva present, not with the police already suspicious. But as I set down my empty glass, I saw Derek's expression change. The mask was gone completely now, replaced by something cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've been thinking about what happened to Mom. How she just collapsed like that right after drinking your coffee." Eva frowned. "It wasn't Mom's coffee. You made it yourself, remember?" Derek's smile was razor sharp. "Did I? Or did someone switch the cups while I wasn't looking?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Eva looked between us, confusion giving way to growing alarm. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. Derek never took his eyes off me. "Your mother is a very clever woman, Eva. Much cleverer than I gave her credit for." I kept my expression neutral, but my heart was racing. He knew. Somehow, he'd figured out what I'd done. "I think you should explain yourself, Derek," I said calmly. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean." Derek set down his champagne flute with deliberate precision. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Eva stepped between us, her voice rising with panic. "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" Derek looked at his wife, really looked at her, and for a moment, genuine emotion flickered across his features. "I'm sorry, Eva," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to find out this way." Then he lunged for me, his hands reaching for my throat, and Eva's scream shattered the night. The attack lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Derek's hands closed around my throat, his green eyes wild with desperation and rage. I clawed at his wrists, fighting for air, while Eva screamed and tried to pull him away. "Derek, stop. What are you doing? Stop." But he was beyond reason, beyond hearing anything but the voice in his head that whispered he had to eliminate the witness, had to silence the woman who could destroy him. I managed to grab a heavy crystal vase from the hall table and swing it with all my strength. It connected with the side of Derek's head with a sickening crack, and he released me, stumbling backward. Eva caught him as he fell, her face white with shock and terror.
"Derek."
"Oh God, Derek, what?" She looked up at me, and I saw the moment everything clicked into place. The fear in her eyes, the growing understanding of what she'd just witnessed. "Call 911. I gasped, rubbing my throat where Derek's fingers had left marks.
"Now."
But Derek was already struggling to his feet, blood trickling from the gash on his temple. His eyes found mine across the foyer, and I saw death in them. Cold, calculating, inevitable. "You don't understand," he said to Eva, his voice eerily calm. "She killed my mother. She switched the coffee cups and let Mom drink poison meant for her." Eva's face crumpled. That can't be true." "Call Detective Morrison," I told her, pulling out my phone. "Tell him Derek Hartwell just confessed to attempted murder." Derek laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Confessed? You're the one who just confessed, Marian. You killed an innocent woman." "An innocent woman?" I kept my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Martha Crenshaw was your partner, Derek. She'd been helping you con wealthy women for decades." Eva sank onto the stairs, her phone clutched in trembling hands. "I don't understand. None of this makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said, never taking my eyes off Derek. "Your husband tried to poison me because I refused to fund his latest scheme. When that failed, he decided to eliminate me more directly." Derek wiped blood from his forehead, his smile returning. "Prove it." The challenge hung in the air between us. He thought he was safe, thought his word against mine would be enough to create reasonable doubt. He had no idea how thoroughly I'd prepared for this moment. "I already have," I said quietly. Derek's confidence faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, I hit speed dial on my phone. Detective Morrison answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Cole? We weren't expecting to hear from you until—" "Derek Hartwell just tried to kill me," I said clearly. "I'm at his house with my daughter. We need immediate assistance. Are you safe now?" I looked at Derek, who was backing toward the kitchen, his eyes darting between Eva and me like a trapped animal calculating escape routes.
"For the moment," I said.
"But, Detective Morrison, you might want to move up your timeline. Units are already en route. Stay on the line." Derek heard the sirens then, distant but growing closer. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally, cold rage. "You set me up," he said. "You set yourself up," I corrected. "I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with." Eva was crying now, great heaving sobs that echoed through the foyer. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." Derek looked at his wife, and for a moment, his mask slipped entirely. I saw genuine grief in his eyes, real regret for what he'd put her through. "Eva," he said softly, "baby, I need you to know that everything I felt for you is real. You were never part of the plan." "What plan?" she whispered. Derek glanced at me, then back at Eva. "Your mother was right about me. I married you for your money, but I fell in love with you for real, and that complicated everything." The sirens were getting closer. Derek ran his hands through his hair, leaving streaks of blood in the dark strands. "I never meant for it to go this far," he continued. "But when your mother refused to help us, when she made it clear she'd never accept me. I panicked. So you decided to kill her? Eva's voice was barely audible. I thought if she had an accident, a sudden heart attack, you'd inherit everything, and we could start over somewhere else. Just the two of us. Eva stared at him in horror. And Mrs. Green? Derek's face crumpled. Martha was like a mother to me. She raised me after my real parents died. She taught me how to survive, how to do what we did. But she was supposed to stay in the car that day. She wasn't supposed to come inside. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture even darker than I'd imagined. Derek hadn't just been a con artist. He'd been a child raised by con artists, molded from birth to prey on others. When she drank the poison instead of you, Derek continued, his voice breaking, I realized what I'd become, what I'd lost. But by then, it was too late to stop. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as police cars surrounded the house. Derek looked at the lights, then at Eva, then at me. I'm sorry, he said, and I wasn't sure which of us he was talking to. The front door burst open, and Detective Morrison entered with his weapon drawn, followed by 4 uniformed officers. Derek Hartwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Martha Crenshaw and the attempted murder of Marian Cole. Derek didn't resist as they cuffed him. He just stood there, blood drying on his forehead, watching Eva cry. Take care of her, he said to me as they led him away. She's the only good thing I ever did. After the police cars pulled away, Eva and I sat in her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. She'd stopped crying, but her eyes were red and swollen, and she kept staring at the spot where Derek had been standing when they arrested him. How long have you known? She asked finally. Known what, specifically? That he was what he was. I considered lying, trying to spare her feelings. But we'd had enough lies in our family. I suspected from the beginning, I said quietly. I hired an investigator after you announced your engagement. Eva's laugh was bitter. You knew, and you let me marry him anyway? I hoped I was wrong. I hoped love would change him, or at least that he'd be content with what you could give him legitimately. But you never trusted him. No, I admitted. I never trusted him. Eva was quiet for a long time, processing everything that had happened. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but hollow. He said he loved me. Do you think that was true? I thought about Derek's face when he'd looked at Eva, the genuine grief in his eyes when he'd realized what he'd lost. Yes, I said. I think it was. But Eva, love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's just another kind of lie. She nodded slowly, then looked at me with eyes that seemed years older than they had that morning. What happens now? Now we heal, I said. And we make sure Derek Hartwell never hurts anyone again. But even as I said the words, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Derek's arrest was just the beginning. There would be a trial, media attention, and a long process of rebuilding Eva's shattered trust in people. Most importantly, there would be questions about my role in Martha Crenshaw's death. I'd switch those coffee cups knowing what Derek had planned, knowing that someone would die from the poison he'd prepared. The fact that it was his accomplice. The trial began 6 months later, on a gray October morning that seemed fitting for the dark story about to unfold in the courthouse. I'd spent those months helping Eva piece her life back together, watching her slowly emerge from the shell of trauma Derek had left behind. She'd moved back into my house temporarily, unable to bear staying in the place where she'd lived with a killer. We'd had long conversations about trust, about love, about how people we care about can deceive us so completely that we lose faith in our own judgment. Eva was stronger than I'd given her credit for. She'd not only survived Derek's betrayal but had actively participated in building the case against him. She'd provided investigators with financial records, personal correspondence, and intimate details about Derek's behavior that helped establish his pattern of manipulation. But as we sat in the courthouse waiting for the trial to begin, I could see the toll it had taken on her. She was thinner than before, more fragile somehow, as if Derek's deceptions had hollowed her out from the inside. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Eva nodded, but I saw her fingers tremble. "I have to be. Those other women he hurt, they deserve justice." The prosecution had found 6 other victims willing to testify against Derek. Women he'd seduced, robbed, and abandoned across 3 states over the past decade. 2 of them had been physically threatened when they'd tried to expose him. One had received death threats that forced her to relocate and change her identity. Derek's defense team, expensive lawyers paid for by liquidating the assets he'd stolen over the years, was arguing that Martha Crenshaw's death was accidental, that Derek had been planning to poison himself in a murder-suicide attempt but had been interrupted by his mother's unexpected arrival. It was a clever strategy, painting Derek as a man driven to desperation by grief and financial pressure rather than a calculating killer. They were hoping to get the charges reduced from murder to manslaughter, maybe even win an acquittal based on temporary insanity. They hadn't counted on me. When I took the witness stand, I looked directly at Derek for the first time since his arrest. He'd lost weight in jail, and his perfect hair had grown out, revealing gray roots that made him look older and more ordinary. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, missing that spark of humanity that separates people from predators. "Mrs. Cole," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." I spoke clearly and calmly, describing Derek's courtship of Eva, their marriage, his increasing demands for money. I detailed his failed business ventures, his pattern of deception, and my growing suspicions about his true nature. "Did you hire a private investigator to look into Mr. Hartwell's background?" "Yes, I did." "And what did that investigation reveal?" For the next hour, I laid out Derek's history methodically. The prosecutor presented evidence from the investigator's files, police reports, victim statements, financial records showing how Derek and Martha had systematically drained bank accounts across multiple states. When we got to the day of Martha's death, I described Derek's unexpected visit, the coffee he'd brought, and my decision to excuse myself to the kitchen. "What did you do while you were in the kitchen, Mrs. Cole?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. The moment when I'd have to admit what I'd done, knowing it would be dissected by Derek's defense team and possibly used to paint me as the real villain in this story. "I switched the coffee cups," I said clearly. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Derek's lawyer sat up straighter, sensing an opportunity. "You switched the cups?" the prosecutor continued, following the script we'd rehearsed. "Can you explain why?" I suspected Derek had put something in the coffee meant for me. It had a strange, metallic smell that didn't belong. When I realized his mother was going to be joining us, I made a decision to protect myself. "Did you know the coffee was poisoned?" "I suspected it was dangerous, yes." "Did you intend for Mrs. Crenshaw to drink the poisoned coffee?" This was the crucial question, the one that would determine whether I faced charges of my own. "No," I said firmly. "I intended to dispose of the coffee safely after Derek left. Mrs. Crenshaw's death was a tragic accident that occurred because she drank from the wrong cup before I could prevent it. It was the truth, mostly. I hadn't intended for Martha to die. I'd simply intended not to die myself." The fact that Derek's accomplice had paid the price for his attempt on my life was ironic justice, but it was a murder. Derek's lawyer approached for cross-examination with the confidence of a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. "Mrs. Cole, you've testified that you suspected Mr. Hartwell of putting something dangerous in the coffee he brought you." "That's correct. But you didn't call the police."
"No."
"You didn't refuse to drink it." "I pretended to drink it, but I didn't actually consume any." "Instead, you made a deliberate decision to switch the cups, knowing that someone else might drink the poisoned coffee." I met his gaze steadily. I made a decision to protect myself from what I believed was an attempt on my life, by ensuring that someone else would be poisoned instead. By ensuring that I would not be poisoned. What happened to Mrs. Crenshaw was not my intention. The lawyer paced in front of the witness stand, building to his climax. Mrs. Cole, isn't it true that you deliberately caused Martha Crenshaw's death in order to frame my client for murder? The courtroom was silent, waiting for my answer. I looked at Eva, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face. I looked at the other victims Derek had hurt, women who'd found the courage to testify against him. And finally, I looked at Derek himself, who was watching me with the same predatory intensity I'd seen in my sunroom that day. No, I said. That's not true. I switched the cups to save my own life. Everything that happened after that was a consequence of your client's decision to bring poison into my home. The rest of the trial proceeded predictably. Derek's defense team tried to paint me as a vindictive mother-in-law who'd orchestrated an elaborate frame-up. The prosecution presented evidence of Derek's long history of fraud and violence. Expert witnesses testified about digitalis poisoning, about the sophisticated planning required to obtain and administer the toxin. But the moment that sealed Derek's fate came when Eva took the stand. She spoke quietly but clearly about her marriage, about the gradual realization that the man she'd loved had never really existed. She described Derek's increasing desperation in the weeks before Martha's death, his strange behavior, his hints about solving their financial problems in ways that had made her uncomfortable. Did your husband ever discuss harming your mother? The prosecutor asked. Eva's voice broke as she answered. He said that if something happened to her, our problems would be over. He said accidents happened all the time to elderly people, especially wealthy ones with young relatives. Derek's face went white as Eva continued. I thought he was just venting his frustration. I never imagined he meant. I never thought he would actually. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The jury had heard enough. Derek was convicted on all charges: first-degree murder in Martha Crenshaw's death, attempted murder in my case, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away in shackles, Derek looked back at Eva one last time. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear from across the courtroom. But Eva heard them, and her face crumpled with fresh grief. Later, in the parking garage, I asked her what he'd said. He said he was sorry, she whispered. He said he loved me, and he was sorry for everything. I put my arms around my daughter and held her while she cried, knowing that Derek's apology, however sincere, would never be enough to undo the damage he'd caused. But it was over. Finally, completely over. Or so I thought. 3 days after Derek's sentencing, Detective Morrison came to see me at home. I found him in my study, examining the books on my shelves with the careful attention of a man who understood that people's reading habits revealed more about them than they usually intended. Detective, I said, settling into my chair behind the desk. I wasn't expecting you. Just tying up loose ends, he said, taking the seat across from me. There are still some questions about the Martha Crenshaw case. My blood went cold, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of questions? Morrison pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. We found something interesting when we searched Derek's house after his arrest, he said. A partial recording on his phone from the day Martha died. My heart started racing, but I forced myself to remain calm. A recording of what? Your conversation with him that morning. Apparently, he was planning to document your confession. Proof that you'd agreed to fund his business after initially refusing. Insurance, in case you tried to back out later. Morrison hit play on his phone, and Derek's voice filled my study, tinny but clear through the small speaker. Thought it might be a way to start over, Derek was saying. Then my own voice. Where's Eva? Spa day with her girlfriends. She deserves some pampering after. Well, after the stress I've caused her. I insisted she go. Morrison paused the recording. The interesting thing is what happens next. There's about 10 minutes of silence, then the sound of footsteps, some muffled conversation, and then screaming. He fast-forwarded through the recording, and suddenly we were hearing Martha Crenshaw's final moments, her confused gasps, Derek's panicked voice calling her name, my own calm tones as I called for an ambulance. The thing is, Morrison continued, there's something else on this recording. Something that wasn't mentioned during the trial. My mouth went dry. What do you mean? Morrison rewound the recording to the period of silence, then enhanced the audio. Suddenly, I could hear faint sounds from the kitchen. Water running, the clink of ceramic, footsteps moving back and forth. That's you in the kitchen, Morrison said matter-of-factly. Switching the cups. We stared at each other across my desk, and I realized that my entire carefully constructed defense was about to crumble. Detective, I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. Here's what I think happened, he said. Derek came to your house with poison coffee, intending to kill you. You figured out what he was planning and switched the cups, knowing that someone else would drink the poison. Martha Crenshaw died because you made a deliberate choice to save yourself at her expense. I started to deny it, then stopped. What was the point? Morrison was too good a detective to be fooled by lies, and I was tired of the deception. That's exactly what happened, I said quietly. Morrison nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less than the truth from me. The question is, what am I going to do about it? I looked at this man who held my future in his hands, trying to read his expression. He could charge me with Martha's murder, or at minimum with involuntary manslaughter. He could destroy the life I'd built, send me to prison, ruin Eva's already fragile recovery. Martha Crenshaw wasn't an innocent victim, Morrison said after a long moment. She was Derek's partner, his accomplice in multiple felonies spanning decades. She helped him target vulnerable women, helped him steal their money, helped him threaten them when they tried to resist. But she didn't deserve to die, I said. No, Morrison agreed. She didn't. But she also chose to participate in a lifestyle that put her at risk. When you partner with killers, sometimes you become collateral damage. He closed his notebook and stood up, but made no move to arrest me. I'm not going to charge you, Mrs. Cole, he said finally. Derek Hartwell is serving life in prison for Martha's murder, and that's where he belongs. You acted in self-defense even if your methods were unorthodox. I sagged with relief, but Morrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, I want you to understand something. You took a life, even if it wasn't the life Derek intended to take. That's something you'll have to live with for the rest of your days. After he left, I sat alone in my study for a long time, thinking about Martha Crenshaw. I'd never known her real name. To me, she'd always been Mrs. Green, Derek's sweet elderly mother who died tragically after drinking poison coffee. But Morrison was right. She'd chosen to partner with Derek, chosen to help him prey on innocent women. She'd played the role of loving mother, concerned friend, whatever the con required. She'd been complicit in his crimes for decades. That didn't make her death less tragic, but it did make my role in it more complicated than simple murder. I walked upstairs to Eva's room, where she was packing the last of her belongings. She decided to move back to her own place. Not the house she'd shared with Derek, which we'd sold, but a new apartment across town where she could start fresh. The detective was here, I told her, sitting on the edge of her bed. Eva looked up from the suitcase she was packing. About Derek? About Martha Crenshaw. About what really happened that day. I told her everything. About switching the cups, about knowing someone would drink the poison, about my decision to save myself at Martha's expense. Eva listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, She was quiet for a long time. "Are you going to be arrested?" she asked finally.
No.
Detective Morrison decided not to press charges. Eva nodded slowly, then resumed her packing. "I'm glad," she said quietly. "I know that makes me a terrible person, but I'm glad you're not going to prison for protecting yourself from my husband." "You're not a terrible person," I assured her. "You're a woman who's been through hell and came out the other side stronger." Eva smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. I learned from the best. That evening, after Eva had moved out and the house was quiet again, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my sunroom, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Derek was in prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. His victims had gotten justice, and Eva was free to rebuild her life without the shadow of his manipulation hanging over her. As for me, I'd saved my own life by sacrificing another's, and I'd have to find a way to live with that choice. It wasn't the ending I'd envisioned when this all began, but it was the ending we'd earned through our choices and actions. Sometimes, justice isn't clean or simple. Sometimes, it's just the best outcome you can manage in an imperfect world. And sometimes, that has to be enough. 2 years passed quietly. Eva had rebuilt her life with admirable resilience, starting her own consulting business and even beginning to date again, carefully, cautiously, but with genuine hope for the future. We had dinner together twice a week, and slowly, our relationship had evolved from mother and daughter to something more like friends. Derek sent letters from prison, which Eva received but never opened. I knew because she brought them to me, asking what she should do with them. Burn them, I always advised, and she always did, using the fireplace in my study to reduce his words to ash and smoke. Life had settled into a comfortable routine. I managed my investments, tended my gardens, and slowly began to forgive myself for Martha Crenshaw's death. Detective Morrison had been right. I would carry that guilt for the rest of my life, but I'd learned to bear its weight without letting it crush me. Then, on a cold December morning, everything changed again. I was in my study, reviewing quarterly investment reports, when Mrs. Patterson knocked on the door. "Ma'am," she said, her face creased with concern, "there's a young woman here to see you. Says her name is Sarah Mitchell, and she needs to speak with you about Derek Hartwell." The name sent ice through my veins. Derek had been locked away for 2 years. What could anyone possibly want to discuss about him now? "Send her in," I said, closing the financial reports and preparing myself for whatever fresh hell was about to walk through my door. Sarah Mitchell was perhaps 25, with auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of Eva at that age. She was nervous, twisting a small purse in her hands as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "Mrs. Cole," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think Derek Hartwell might be my father." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at this young woman, looking for resemblances to Derek in her features and finding them. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way she held her head when she was thinking. "What makes you think that?" I asked carefully. Sarah opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder, much like the one I'd used to research Derek years earlier. "My mother died 6 months ago. Cancer. While I was going through her papers, I found these." She handed me a stack of photographs, and my heart nearly stopped. They showed a younger Derek, maybe 30, with a beautiful redhead who was clearly Sarah's mother. They were at restaurants, on beaches, in hotel rooms. The pictures spanned what looked like several months, and in many of them, Derek's hand was resting protectively over the woman's obviously pregnant belly. "Her name was Jennifer Mitchell," Sarah continued. "She never told me who my father was, just that he was unavailable and that it was better for both of us if he stayed out of our lives." I studied the photographs more carefully, and my blood turned cold. In the background of one picture, I could see a hotel nameplate, the Fairmont, San Francisco. I remember that hotel because my late husband had mentioned it in one of his business trip reports 25 years ago. When were these taken? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 1999, according to the dates on the back. I was born in March of 2000, 25 years ago. The same year my husband had died in what everyone assumed was a heart attack. The same year Derek had supposedly been working as a business consultant in California. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the file I'd kept on Derek, despite telling myself repeatedly that I should destroy it. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages, looking for the timeline Stephanie had constructed of Derek's activities. There it was, 1999 to 2000, San Francisco. Listed as business ventures. Details unknown. Now I knew what those business ventures had been. Sarah, I said slowly, what do you know about your mother's death? She looked puzzled by the question. Cancer, like I said.
Pancreatic.
She fought it for 2 years, but... And before the cancer? Was she healthy? Very healthy. She was only 52 when she was diagnosed. The doctor said it was unusual for someone her age with no family history, but these things happen. Or these things are made to happen, I thought grimly. Pancreatic cancer was notoriously difficult to detect in its early stages and had a very low survival rate. It was also one of the cancers that could be induced through certain toxic exposures. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. In the months before your mother got sick, did she have any contact with Derek? Any at all? Sarah's face went pale. How did you know? She never told me they'd been in touch, but I found emails. He'd been writing to her for months, saying he wanted to meet me, to be part of my life. Mom kept refusing, but he was persistent. Did they ever meet? Once. Last Christmas, a few weeks before Mom got her diagnosis. She came home upset, said she'd made a terrible mistake. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but she started locking all the doors and checking them twice before bed. She even had a security system installed. I closed my eyes, seeing the pattern with horrible clarity. Derek, locked in prison, had somehow discovered he had a daughter. He'd reached out to Jennifer Mitchell, probably claiming he'd found God or wanted to make amends. He'd convinced her to meet him. Prison visits were monitored, but there were ways to smuggle things in and out if you had the right connections. A slow-acting poison, something that would take months to manifest as cancer. Something that would look like a tragic but natural death. And now Jennifer was gone, and Sarah was here, asking questions about her father. Sarah, I said urgently, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Derek Hartwell is not someone you want in your life. He's a killer, a manipulator, and he's extremely dangerous even from behind bars. I know about his conviction, she said quietly. I looked him up after I found the photos. But Mrs. Cole, he's still my father. And now that Mom's gone, he's the only family I have left. The words sent a chill down my spine because I recognized the tone. It was the same desperate need for connection that had made Eva vulnerable to Derek's manipulation. The same longing for family that he'd exploited in every woman he'd ever targeted. Have you been in contact with him? I asked. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Sarah, please tell me you haven't visited him. Just once, she whispered. Last month. I wanted to see him, to understand why he abandoned us. And what did he tell you? Tears began streaming down Sarah's face. He said he never knew about me until recently. He said if he'd known Mom was pregnant, he would have married her, would have been there for us both. He said he was a different person then, that prison had changed him. Classic Derek. Spinning a story of redemption and regret, painting himself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own destruction. He also said, Sarah continued, that you were the reason my mother died. that you'd orchestrated his imprisonment to cover up your own crimes, and that Mom paid the price for his inability to protect the people he loved. The room felt like it was spinning. Derek had found a way to strike at me from prison, using his own daughter as a weapon. He'd killed Jennifer Mitchell to punish her for keeping Sarah from him, then convinced Sarah that I was responsible for her mother's death. It was diabolical, and it was brilliant, and it was exactly the kind of long-term manipulation Derek excelled at. "Sarah," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "Derek is lying to you. Your mother didn't die because of me. She died because Derek wanted to control you, and he saw her as an obstacle." "That's not true." Sarah shot to her feet, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're just trying to protect yourself. Derek told me you'd try to turn me against him. Did he also tell you what he wants you to do?" I asked quietly. Sarah's defiance faltered slightly. He wants me to get to know you, to spend time with Eva. He says you owe him a debt for destroying his life, and that debt includes taking care of his daughter. And if I refuse?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "He says there are other ways to collect what's owed." I stood up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. Derek had orchestrated this entire scenario from his prison cell, using his daughter's grief and longing to manipulate her into becoming his instrument of revenge. He'd killed her mother to isolate her, then convinced her that I was the real enemy. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that Derek doesn't want you to know," I said, moving around the desk to face her directly. "Your mother didn't die of natural causes. She was poisoned, slowly and carefully, by a man who wanted to punish her for keeping his daughter away from him." "No." Sarah shook her head frantically. "You're lying." The doctors said what they were supposed to say. But certain toxins can mimic cancer, can cause the same symptoms and progression. Derek has used them before. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Morrison, putting it on speaker. "Detective, it's Marian Cole. I need you to reopen an investigation into the death of Jennifer Mitchell in Los Angeles. I believe she was murdered by Derek Hartwell." Morrison's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mrs. Cole, Derek's been in prison for 2 years. How could he have? He has a daughter, Detective, and I think he's been using her to carry out his revenge from behind bars." I looked at Sarah, who had gone pale as parchment. The truth was starting to penetrate the wall of lies Derek had built around her. "Sarah," I said gently, "your father is a monster, but you don't have to be his victim. You can choose to walk away from this, to build a life that isn't defined by his crimes." She stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned and ran from the room, her footsteps echoing through the house as she fled. I stood alone in my study, knowing that Derek's game was just beginning. He'd played his opening move by sending Sarah to me, and now I had to figure out how to protect both Eva and myself from whatever came next. Because Derek Hartwell wasn't finished with us yet. Not by a long shot. The phone call came at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after Sarah's visit. I'd been expecting it, dreading it, but the sound of my landline ringing in the darkness still sent ice through my veins. "Hello, Marian." Derek's voice was different than I remembered, rougher, with an edge of madness that hadn't been there during his trial. Prison had changed him, but not in the way he'd claimed to Sarah. "How are you calling me?" I asked, sitting up in bed and reaching for the lamp. "Amazing what you can accomplish with the right connections," Derek said, his tone conversational. "Did you enjoy meeting my daughter? She's a lovely girl. Too good for a father like you." Derek's laugh was like broken glass. "Sarah is many things, but lovely isn't one of them. Not anymore. Not since she learned the truth about what you did to her mother." My blood turned to ice. "I didn't do anything to Jennifer Mitchell. Didn't you? You're the one who put me in here, Marian. You're the one who destroyed my life, broke up my family, stole my freedom. Jennifer died because I couldn't protect her from the enemies you created for me." It was classic Derek, taking no responsibility for his actions while blaming everyone else for the consequences. But there was something different in his voice now, something that suggested he genuinely believed his own lies. "What do you want, Derek?" "Justice," he said simply. "I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To watch the people you love suffer because of choices you made. If you hurt Eva..." "Eva?" Derek's laugh was genuinely amused. "Oh, Marian, you still don't understand, do you? Eva was never the target. Eva was just the key to get close to you." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I mean everything. Our entire relationship, the marriage, the business schemes, all of it was designed to get me into your inner circle. Eva was never anything more than a means to an end." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd always suspected Derek had married Eva for her money, but I'd thought he'd at least cared about her on some level. To learn that she'd been nothing more than a tool in his long-term plan to destroy me was devastating. "But why?" I whispered. "What did I ever do to you?" Derek's voice turned cold as winter. "You kill my father." The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering onto the nightstand. I stared at it for a moment, then picked it up with shaking hands. "What did you say?" 25 years ago, you kill my father. Frank Hartwell. Ring any bells?" The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Frank Hartwell, my husband's business partner in a real estate development that had gone horribly wrong. The project had been Frank's idea, a luxury resort on the California coast that was supposed to make them both millions. Instead, it had been a disaster. Environmental violations, construction delays, cost overruns, everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. By the time the project collapsed, Frank had embezzled nearly $2 million from their partnership to keep it afloat. My husband had been furious, had threatened to have Frank prosecuted for fraud. They'd had a terrible fight the night before my husband's death, screaming at each other in his study until nearly midnight. The next morning, my husband was found dead of an apparent heart attack. "Frank Hartwell was your father," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "My adoptive father," Derek corrected. "He took me in when I was 8, after my real parents died in a car accident. He was the only father I ever knew, and you destroyed him." "I didn't kill Frank, Derek. He died of a heart attack." "He died because you and your husband drove him to it." Derek's voice cracked with emotion. "You bankrupted him, destroyed his reputation, threatened to have him arrested. He couldn't live with the shame, so he took his own life." I remembered Frank's death now. A heart attack in his hotel room in San Francisco, just days after the partnership dissolved. The police had ruled it natural causes, but there had been whispers of suicide, rumors that Frank had overdosed on his heart medication rather than face prosecution. "And then," Derek continued, his voice gaining strength, "your husband died too. Convenient, wasn't it? The only witness to Frank's embezzlement, gone before he could testify." The implication was clear, and it took my breath away. "You think I killed my husband?" "I know you did. Heart attack, just like Frank's. Digitalis poisoning, made to look natural. You eliminated the man who could expose you, then played the grieving widow while you inherited everything." It was insane, but I could see how Derek had constructed the narrative in his mind. Two men, both connected to a failed business deal, both dead of heart attacks within days of each other. To a grieving 8-year-old who'd already lost 2 sets of parents, it would be easy to see conspiracy where there was only coincidence. "Derek, you're wrong. I loved my husband. I would never have hurt him." "Prove it," he said simply. "Prove you didn't kill him, and I'll call off my daughter." "Call her off from what?" Derek's smile was audible in his voice. "Sarah is very talented, Marian. I've been training her since she was 16, teaching her everything I know about reading people, manipulating them, getting close to them. She's been practicing on other targets for years." My blood went cold. "What other targets?" "Oh, various wealthy widows and heiresses. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to hone her skills. Sarah has a gift for making people trust her, for becoming indispensable in their lives. And then, when they're completely dependent on her. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood exactly what he was implying. She's been visiting Eva, I said, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. Has she? How interesting. I wouldn't know, of course, being locked away in here. But if Sarah has been spending time with your daughter, well, Eva always was a trusting soul. I was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with frantic haste. If you hurt her, I won't hurt anyone, Marian. I'm in prison, remember? But Sarah has her own relationship with your family now. Her own reasons for being close to you both. And unlike me, she's not locked away where she can't act on her impulses. The line went dead. I called Eva immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Eva, it's Mom. Call me back immediately. It's an emergency. I tried her landline, her work number, even the emergency contact she'd given me for her building's doorman. Nothing. 20 minutes later, I was in my car, racing through the empty streets toward Eva's apartment. My mind was spinning through every conversation I'd had with her over the past 2 weeks, looking for mentions of new friends, anyone she'd been spending time with. There had been someone, a young woman she'd met at a coffee shop, someone who'd been so sweet and so easy to talk to. Someone who'd reminded Eva of herself at that age, who'd lost her mother recently and was struggling to find her place in the world. Someone who'd needed a friend, and Eva, kind, trusting Eva, had opened her heart to her. I parked outside Eva's building and raced up the stairs to her floor, my heart pounding with terror. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, and when I reached Eva's door, I found it standing slightly ajar. Eva? I called out, pushing the door open. The apartment was dark, but I could see signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, broken glass from a picture frame. Eva's purse spilled across the floor. I found them in the kitchen. Eva was sitting at the table, her hands bound behind her back, her mouth covered with duct tape. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she was alive, conscious, unharmed, as far as I could tell. Sarah Mitchell stood behind her, holding a knife to Eva's throat. "Hello, Mrs. Cole," Sarah said pleasantly. "We've been waiting for you." The transformation in Derek's daughter was complete. Gone was the confused, grieving young woman who'd sat in my study 2 weeks ago. In her place stood a predator, cold and calculating, with her father's eyes and her father's smile. "Let her go, Sarah," I said quietly. "Whatever Derek has told you, whatever he's promised you, it's not worth this." "Isn't it?" Sarah pressed the knife a little closer to Eva's throat, and I saw a thin line of blood appear. "My father spent 25 years planning his revenge against you. He married your daughter, lived in your house, became part of your family, all so he could destroy you from the inside. And where did that get him? Prison for life." Sarah's smile widened. "That was just phase 1. This is phase 2. Which is? Making you choose," Sarah said simply. "Your daughter's life, or your confession." "Confession to what?" "To murdering my grandfather. To poisoning your husband and stealing everything that should have belonged to Frank Hartwell's family." I stared at this young woman, Derek's daughter, his final weapon, and realized that nothing I said would change her mind. She'd been shaped by his hatred, molded by his need for revenge, turned into a perfect instrument of destruction. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. "All right," I said, reaching slowly into my purse. "You want a confession? I'll give you one." Sarah's eyes lit up with triumph, and I saw Derek's victory in her expression. But instead of pulling out a phone to record my confession, I drew the small pistol I'd started carrying after Derek's trial. "Here's my confession, Sarah." I didn't kill your grandfather, and I didn't kill my husband. But I will kill you if you don't let my daughter go." Sarah's confidence faltered for just a moment, but then her grip on the knife tightened. "You won't shoot me. If you do, Eva dies too." "Maybe," I said, taking careful aim. "But you'll die first. And Derek's revenge dies with you." We stood in Eva's kitchen, two women separated by 25 years of hatred and pain, each holding the other's life in our hands. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Then Sarah smiled, Derek's smile, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. "You know what the beautiful thing is, Mrs. Cole? Even if you kill me, Derek wins. Because you'll have become exactly what he always said you were. A killer. A woman who destroys families to protect herself." She was right, and we both knew it. If I pulled that trigger, I'd be proving Derek's point, validating every lie he'd told about me. I'd be trading my daughter's life for my soul, and Derek would have his victory even from behind bars. But Eva was my daughter, my only child, the most important thing in my life. I steadied my aim, looked Sarah Mitchell directly in the eyes, and spoke the words that would define the rest of my life. "Then I guess Derek wins." I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small kitchen, and Sarah collapsed, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor. Eva screamed behind her gag, her eyes wide with shock and terror. I rushed to untie Eva, my hands shaking as I pulled away the duct tape and cut through the ropes binding her wrists. She fell into my arms, sobbing, and I held her close, smelling her hair, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. "It's over," I whispered. "It's finally over." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. Derek's revenge had succeeded in ways he'd never imagined. He'd wanted to turn me into a killer, and he had. He'd wanted to destroy the woman I'd been, and he had. I was no longer Marian Cole, respected widow and devoted mother. I was Marian Cole, the woman who'd killed two people to protect herself and her daughter. The police arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by neighbors who'd heard the gunshot. Detective Morrison took one look at the scene, Sarah's body, Eva's restraints, my smoking gun, and understood exactly what had happened. "Self-defense," he said simply. "Clear case of self-defense." And it was. Sarah Mitchell had been holding my daughter hostage, threatening to kill her unless I confessed to crimes I hadn't committed. Any jury in the world would have acquitted me. But legal justification and moral absolution weren't the same thing. I'd taken a life, the life of a young woman who'd been twisted by her father's hatred into something monstrous, but who might have been saved if I'd been smarter, faster, better. Derek never called again. He didn't need to. His revenge was complete. I'd won the war, but I'd lost myself in the process. And in the end, maybe that was victory enough for a man who'd spent his entire life destroying the people who crossed him. Eva recovered, eventually. She sold her apartment and moved back in with me, and we rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, like archaeologists reconstructing a shattered vase. We never spoke about what had happened in her kitchen that night. We never talked about the choice I'd made, or the cost of keeping her alive. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her looking at me with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite trust either. She loved me, but she'd seen what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. She'd seen me kill someone to protect her, and that knowledge had changed something fundamental between us. Derek Hartwell died in prison 3 years later, found dead in his cell of an apparent heart attack. The irony wasn't lost on me. After spending decades poisoning others and making their deaths look natural, he'd finally succumbed to the same fate. But even in death, he'd had the last laugh. Because he'd accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do 25 years earlier. He'd destroyed Marian Cole, the woman who'd refused to be intimidated by him. And in her place, he'd created someone harder, colder, more ruthless. Someone who could kill without hesitation when the people she loved were threatened. Someone very much like him. I still live in my beautiful house, still tend my gardens, still manage my investments. To the outside world, I'm exactly what I've always been, a wealthy widow who survived a terrible ordeal and came out stronger. But I know the truth. I know what Derek's revenge really cost me. He took my innocence, my certainty about right and wrong, my belief that I was fundamentally different from people like him. He turned me into a killer. And the most terrifying part? I'm not sorry I did it. If Sarah Mitchell walked into my house tomorrow and threatened Eva again, I'd pull that trigger without hesitation. I'd kill to protect my daughter, and I'd sleep soundly afterward. Derek Hartwell set out to destroy me, and he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He made me exactly like him. And God help me, I think I prefer it this way. I'm sitting in my sunroom again, the same chair where this all began, watching my granddaughter chase butterflies in the garden. She's 3 years old now, with Eva's blonde hair and bright smile, and she calls me Nana in a voice that sounds like music. Eva remarried 2 years ago, a kind, gentle man named Michael who makes her laugh and treats her like she's made of spun gold. He doesn't know our full story, doesn't know what happened in that kitchen or what his wife witnessed. Some secrets are too dark to share, even with the people we love most. But he knows enough. He knows that Eva and I have survived something terrible together, and he respects the bond that trauma forged between us. He never asks questions about the security system, the cameras, the way we both still check locks twice before bed. My granddaughter doesn't know that her Nana once killed a woman to protect her mother. She doesn't know about the nightmares that still wake me sometimes, or the way I still sleep with a gun in my nightstand drawer. To her, I'm just Nana, the woman who reads her stories and bakes cookies and lets her pick flowers from the garden. The woman who will do anything, absolutely anything, to keep her safe. The private investigator I keep on retainer sends me updates every few months. Derek's criminal network was larger than anyone imagined. Dozens of victims across multiple states, millions of dollars stolen over decades. Most of his associates are either dead or in prison now, the last remnants of his empire finally crumbling to dust. But I never stop watching, never stop waiting for the next threat to emerge from the shadows of his past. Because predators like Derek rarely work alone, and revenge is a poison that can outlive the person who first mixed it. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between my granddaughter's laughter, I think about Martha Crenshaw and Sarah Mitchell, 2 women who made the wrong choices, who let themselves be shaped by a killer's vision instead of their own moral compass. I wonder if I'm any different from them now. I wonder if the woman I've become, harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous, is really an improvement over the naive widow Derek first tried to poison 3 years ago. But then my granddaughter runs up to me with a handful of daisies, her face bright with innocent joy, and I remember why the choices I made were necessary. I am not the same woman I was before Derek Hartwell entered my life. I am something new, something forged in the fire of his hatred and tempered by my own will to survive. I am a protector now, a guardian who will never again underestimate the darkness that exists in people's hearts. And if that makes me a monster, well, at least I'm a monster who keeps the people she loves safe. The butterflies dance in the afternoon sunlight, and my granddaughter's laughter fills the air like a promise. This is what I fought for. This is what I killed for. This is what makes it all worthwhile. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of strength, survival, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect someone you love? Your story might be the next one we tell.